Wow. A number of crucial developments took place earlier this week. And I don't believe that they are matters of mere coincidences, but perhaps designed to focus our thoughts on this beautiful island, Jamaica, in a very crucial way. We saw a policy statement issued by the Prime Minister of Jamaica, in which he spoke of the next chapter, pivot to inclusive growth. And I think that portions of that statement, which we've heard at different points in time, are very important. But more crucially, I think whoever it is who crafted the actual presentation by the Prime Minister did an extremely impressive job of bringing a number of pieces together. And that particular speech, because of the way it has been presented, so that if there are gaps in understanding based on where we are at the moment, then those gaps can be filled out by that presentation if the presentation is studied. And also importantly, we had, as we normally do within 6 weeks of the end of a quarter, the Director General of the Planning Institute of Jamaica, in one of the Planning Institute of Jamaica's presentation, presented for us almost simultaneously the preliminary outlook, the estimates preliminarily on the performance of the quarter July to September concerning growth. And whereas in many quarters before, because of the undisturbed periods of consecutive growth that we've had, so whereas we wouldn't ordinarily focus much on the preliminary numbers for the Planning Institute of Jamaica, I think Dr. Wayne Henry's presentation of a couple days ago juxtaposed or listened to with the Prime Minister's next chapter, pivot to inclusive growth, should give us a lot on which we pause and begin to ponder, how do I become a part of the next stage for Jamaica? Why do I say this? Firstly, let's look at the stark reality that is now facing us based on the numbers put out by Dr. Wayne Henry. Despite all that has happened, despite all the growth, the consecutive quarters of economic growth that we've been talking about, however anemic it has been, we've had consecutive quarters of economic growth. But here it is, as happens every single year in a particular period, we go through the hurricane season. Based on where the world is at the moment with climate change, the forecast is that small island developing states, of which Jamaica is an example, we stand to have gains reversed in front of our eyes during the hurricane season because of the extreme vulnerabilities created by the severity of the disasters that are likely to hit us. And we had one recently in the form of Beryl, and as a result of Beryl, And even before Beryl, there was some slowing down in the economy. What exactly is the Planning Institute of Jamaica giving us as the preliminary estimate for how the quarter performed? Here's Dr. Wayne Henry with that.
Today, we are reporting an estimated contraction of 2.8% in real value added during the July to September 2024 quarter, relative to the corresponding quarter of 2023. The estimated outturn for the review quarter largely reflected the adverse impact of Hurricane Beryl and other hydrological events. The downturn is due to an estimated contraction in both the goods producing and the services industries. The industries which suffered the greatest impact from the hurricane were 1. Agriculture, forestry and fishing. Domestic crop production was severely affected, with 13 of 14 parishes recording a decline in hectares reaped during the review quarter. 2. Mining and quarrying. The industry was adversely affected by Hurricane Beryl, which caused infrastructure damage to the port at Rocky Point. This necessitated the diversion of alumina exports to an alternative port, as well as tempered production. 3. Hotels and restaurants. The cancellation of flights and diversion of visitors to alternative destinations adversely affected the country. 4. Electricity and water production. The industry experienced significant damage and loss as a result of the destruction to infrastructure assets caused by Hurricane Beryl. Sections of the island were negatively impacted by the delays in restoring electricity, which had implications for production across other industries. 5. Transport, storage, and communication. The industry was impacted by the closure of Jamaica's international airports and aerodromes and the consequential temporary cessation of travel to the island. Damage to the telecom.
That's Dr. Wayne Henry there. Let me take a break. We come back with you in just a moment. So Dr. Wayne Henry, in the preliminary estimates for the Planning Institute of Jamaica, has told us that the numbers show a decline for July to September of 2.8%, directly associated with Hurricane Beryl. And thereafter that, we had the rains associated with Raphael. What does this all mean, and why is this presentation so important within the context of the pivot to inclusive growth as outlined by the Prime Minister? The presentation is important because we know that we had a period of perhaps sustained growth in the period pre and post independent Jamaica in the 60s. Thereafter, one cannot say much about growth for the Jamaican economy. We had the collapse of the financial sector in the 1990s, which, whatever reason you want to attribute to the collapse, that's a matter for you, especially because we do not have a report that gives us any conclusive guidance on the reasons for the collapse. So I make no comment on that at the moment. But the point is that collapse of the financial sector and the rescuing of the institutions by the decisions of the day, they led to what the Prime Minister has indicated. It is a blow to the size of 40 Hurricane Beryls. And when I heard the Prime Minister give that number, that really jolted me, because here we are now. Hurricane Beryl is so recent. All of us now adults, we know the impact. We know that portions of St. Elizabeth and some of perhaps Manchester, they were without electricity, a lot of people without water. We know of the impact. And on top of that, we're hearing, as I played a moment ago, the preliminary numbers from the Planning Institute of Jamaica telling us that the direct impact of Hurricane Beryl has been a 2.8% reduction in the gross domestic product for Jamaica. So multiply that by the times that the Prime Minister is telling us now that FinSAC was that size, 40 times Hurricane Beryl. And why is that important? It is important because it should focus our minds on the reasons we never had resources to properly maintain the infrastructure built back in the 60s, back in the 70s, in the 80s. We just couldn't do it because there was not enough money to go around. So all of these infrastructural systems now, they've started to collapse. And with the collapse, we now have a little bit more than we had in the decades before now. And why do we now have more than we've had for those decades? We now have that because for the last 10, 12 years or so, we've embarked on economic stability. And what was extremely good about the Prime Minister's presentation is that he recognized and thanked the Honorable Mr. Bruce Golding, the Most Honorable Portia Simpson Miller, the Honorable Dr. Peter Phillips, Audley Shaw, the current governor of the Bank of Jamaica, because he was with the Economic Program Oversight Committee, and Dr. Nigel Clark, as well as Keith Duncan, who chaired the committee, and other members of the council. So it's a bipartisan a speech that recognized the input from individuals across all different sectors, including the people of Jamaica. Yeah? But now that we have a little bit more, and now that we've had a policy where we've paid down as much as we could on the debt, we are, for the first time since the 90s, on the road to having a debt to GDP ratio of about 70% or thereabouts, the pre-FinSAC levels. It simply means that unless we continue to, one, maintain the debt at this level and going down lower, and on top of that, unless we now find out and find the fix for the low growth in our gross domestic product, all of the gains that we've had over the last 10, 12 years, we run the risk of losing them. The good thing is, it appears we have a government and an opposition who've recognized that fiscal prudence from here and to many years into the future, that this is something which is of some import to both of them. So even though we have virtual, fully employed workforce at the moment, because we have an unemployment rate, we're told, of about 4-point-something%, which means by international standards, we have a fully employed workforce. For some reason, the growth numbers have eluded us. So we can begin to say to ourselves, and I think we should, the Prime Minister has said it, what do we now need to do to move from the economic stability where our national or net international reserves is now at about 5 point something billion US. Or inflation numbers are trending downwards after all that happened in the economy caused by mostly international events. It's trending in the right direction. We do expect as well a bit later on today, as we reported this morning, that the Bank of Jamaica will indicate whether it will be dropping interest rates, because one of the reasons interest rates went up is so that we could tame the high inflationary numbers that came in. But what else do we need to do to get the growth going? And we heard it before, where about 60% of our workforce does not have the proper certification. We don't have the requisite skill levels. So even though we have full employment, the productivity is extremely low. So far, the government has removed tuition for getting skills certification through HEART, and a number of barriers have been removed. So people will now have to start going on the ground, as I understand some representative of HEART have been doing, to make sure that it encourages people who have the formal training but who do not have the certification to get certified and to upskill them in the ways that they need to be upskilled. And on top of that, we have got to commence using more artificial intelligence and use it in an intelligent manner to help us to get to doing more in less time, because we are completely occupied now and filled with the people we need, but we are not having the levels of productivity that is desired. So the Prime Minister has spoken about the need for focus on education at the primary level, literacy and numeracy and all sorts. But more crucially, there's a way in which, because of where we're coming from in terms of the low trust level in government and the levels of corruption that we've had for a number of decades, we've built up the guardrails so that it is extremely difficult for a bridge to be built, for a road to be patched, without some serious hoops have to be jumped in procurement. These guardrails have now got to the point where they are slowing things down to an absolute crawl. So the example is given of Troy Bridge, for example, which was washed away or broke down in one of the heavy rainfalls or so that we had. And it has taken years for the procurement process to be complete. The impatience of all of us is at an all-time high, and understandably so. So the Prime Minister has spoken about the need to completely change the procurement procedures that are there. And those are enshrined, a lot of them, in laws. He's promised to bring some sort of amendment to the various laws in Parliament so that we can make things easier without the levels of accountability that are desirable in a 21st century democracy, without sacrificing those. And I look forward to those. And part of the reason I'm looking forward to those is because, as I said in listening to an interview with Julian Robinson the other evening, it appears to me that there are no differences whatsoever between where the opposition wants to take the country and where the Prime Minister has articulated it. Perhaps the articulation by the Prime Minister is the most comprehensive that I've heard recently, he having brought all of the pieces together. But if and when amendments are brought to the laws in terms of procurement, I do not anticipate that there will be any disagreement coming from the opposition benches, because we have to get things moving. Yeah? So both of the editorials in the newspaper this morning as well are signaling the support for the pivot. And we do look forward, as others do, to a bit more information, a bit more fleshing out from the Prime Minister at the appropriate time as to how we are going to have the sustained and inclusive growth desired by the country. Those are my